What is up, everybody? Welcome back. Stacking the Box College Football Edition back on Tuesday, November 5th. Week 11 upon us. College football playoff bracket reveal tonight. That is, of course, the only important thing going on the television stations. We got some playoff reveal and some action to talk about. Nothing else in particular. But I'm your host, Reed Wallach, joined as always by Cody Williams. Cody, busy week last week. We got, fast and furious into a busy week 11. How's it going, man?
Going good, man. Yeah, week 10 got a little hectic there, didn't it? Like it was definitely a week where things got shaken up and some of the regression to the mean, I think, that we were kind of waiting for, because we've talked all season about how much parity is in this league or is in college football this year, particularly in the FBS. And like
Mhm.
there had been some teams that hadn't really fallen victim to that. And this past week they definitely did.
It comes around. Sometimes when you least expect it, we're talking some Iowa State 2-touchdown favorite against Texas Tech. It comes in weird and surprising ways, but we got to turn our attention quick. I don't want to waste too much time harping
Yeah.
on week 10 because we got a week 11. But before we even start the games in week 11, tonight, if you're listening to this later, Tuesday, the first college football playoff reveal, the first 12-team playoff projected bracket is going to be revealed. Cody, what are your thoughts? I know there's been a lot of talk about the 12-team playoff versus the 14
Mhm.
playoff first year of that. Like, where are you at this season as a whole with the 12-team playoff?
I think it's going to be really interesting because we're really going to find out what the committee's criteria is, because in the four-team playoff era it could kind of get lost in the shuffle because it kind of wrote itself. Like, yes, last year at the end of the year with Florida State, there was, the debacle that was how they handled that situation. But like for the most part, like you're looking at a one loss or a no loss team. Now we have a 12-team playoff where two loss teams are going to be in the mix. We have a 12-team playoff where what do you do with an Indiana who doesn't really have a quality win, but hey, they're 9-0. So like how
Mhm.
much do you value that? Like we're gonna see what the committee thinks of quality wins, what they think of quality losses, and like how that factors into what they're going for. Because and I think the two teams that I think are going to be super indicative of that are Penn State and Indiana.
Yeah.
Where those teams are ranked in these initial rankings is going to tell us a lot, I think, about where we go from here and how the committee is seeing things.
So not that I'm anti 12-team playoff, but I don't think expanding the playoff was necessarily the best way to get to the final answer. I always like, and I think this year shows that while, yes, I'm excited for more games, I'm excited for some high
Right.
leverage games and stuff. I'm totally with that. But in terms of getting to the answer, which is the national champion, I don't think that you need 12 teams. That being said, I think this year, where there lacks a truly dominant team, I actually think this year is going to work out that way. Whereas, like, I I think more times than not, there's always going to be a team that gets hosed, whether it's the fifth
Mhm.
team in a 14 playoff or a 13th team in a 12-team playoff. But I do think this year it's close enough between a lot of these teams that you're going to get a pretty compelling postseason because as we've been talking about, the top isn't as elite as we've become accustomed to, and the 12th team might be a little bit closer than in other years where the 12th team is likely just a walkover, or the 11th team, I guess, for that matter.
No, 100%. And then like the other, factor in that is the G5 champion that gets into this. Like that's going to push a team out that probably has a better case than the G5 like the highest ranked group of 5 champion. Like that's going to be an interesting wrinkle in this as well when we're talking about snubs. So yeah, it's going to be, I think there's going to be confirmation bias by the end of the playoff that, oh, the 12-team playoff is a resounding success for everything you just mentioned. Because like the 12-team playoff is going to be a hell of a lot of fun, because
Yeah.
handicapping these games, like if you're already looking at these matchups and trying to figure out how you would handicap them, it's hard because a lot of these teams are very even with one another, particularly in like that 7 through 11 range. Like what do you do in that range? Like it's very difficult. So I think like there's going to be confirmation bias, but I do tend to agree with you. Like, I don't think 12 is necessarily the perfect number to decide a national champion. Like, I just think that this year it happens to be working out really great for college football fans as a product.
Yeah, absolutely. So without further ado, so again, this is just going into today or as of this very moment. So obviously these things are going to change, but I wrote mine down. If you're watching on YouTube, you could see my bad handwriting kind of, and I did a little mock bracket. But so Cody, how are we going to do this? Do you want to do Like, should I do my 1 seed, you do your 1 seed, and then we just go back and forth?
Let's go. We each do, you do your top 4 seeds. I'll
Okay.
do my top 4 seeds, like the auto bids, who are
Oh,
projected
got
conference
it.
champions. And then we'll go your 5, my 5, your 6, my 6, and we'll
Got
go
it.
through it that
Okay.
way.
So for me, my 1 seed, Oregon. My 2 seed, I still went with Georgia over Miami because I think that Georgia is going to get the respect, and Miami with a down ACC won't get right now, at least. And I think also it's going to add more in the committee's eyes because they try to like fix these things so it sets up for the next week. I think it's going to add more juice to the Ole Miss game next week, or for this coming weekend. So I put Georgia 2, Miami 3, and then BYU is going to be 4, but I think that's more of a placeholder than anything.
So we have the exact same top 4 then.
You went Georgia 2 as well.
I did, for the exact same reasons that you said. And also, like what I mentioned a second ago about quality wins. Georgia at least has some quality wins in SEC play. Like in a down ACC, who is Miami really beaten at this point? Like, it's not been an impressive run to this point. Like, the Louisville win looks better, sure, because Louisville beat Clemson. We'll find out later what I think of that Clemson win, though, as we're going through this. But like, I do think that I think there's always going to be SEC bias, and I think Georgia gets the benefit of that in these first rankings.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And then I think we could agree BYU as the 4 seed, more of a placeholder than anything for right now. BYU undefeated. They have a tough game, a small road favorite at Utah this weekend. But I mean, look, if BYU is to run the table, they will get that 4 seed if they keep it up. So we'll see how that goes. So let's move to our 5 seed. I went with Ohio State.
Okay.
Off the win against Penn State, 1 loss. Their 1 loss is as good as any other team in the country. On the road at Oregon by 1. I think viewed as arguably the best team in the country, except that they have 1 loss and Oregon doesn't. The winner of that game would have been the 1 seed. The loser of that game was going to be the 5 seed, playing out how this season has gone so far. So I think Ohio State 5 is a pretty easy call, in my opinion. Do you agree?
I do agree. I have Ohio State at 5 as well. I mean, your 1 loss is in Eugene by 1 point. Like, you're not going to get help. That's not going to be held against you too harshly.
All right, 6 seed. I went Texas.
Okay.
What'd you do?
I also have Texas.
Okay.
And
a lot of the same reasons as Ohio State.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, your 1 loss is to the number 2 ranked team. And granted, it wasn't as impressive as Ohio State's loss to Oregon. Like, you got handled by Georgia. You got absolutely manhandled in that game. At the same time, you have a win over a Vanderbilt team that's top 25 now. You know, that playing that game close does not look as bad as you might have thought coming into the season. You have dominant wins over a Michigan and an Oklahoma, who, granted, are not ranked teams, but are solid teams. They're not, the bottom of the barrel.
Yes, I agree. So for me, number 7, this is where I think the top 6 was pretty clean. Maybe you could reposition Georgia, Miami or something, but I think those 6 being in, pretty obvious in my opinion. As Chris chimes in and says, BYU could lose and Boise State could get the 4 seed. Very, very possible. We have to see how that. This is just for right now, though, that BYU as the 4 seed on this first review. I think we could agree there. The number 7 seed, I went with Indiana.
Okay.
Undefeated. I think you got to put some respect on that. And I look at the teams that I was debating between, and we're obviously going to move down the list and we're going to figure out where I stand on some of these teams. But to me, they're undefeated, and it's the way in which they're winning these games. Yeah. I know the schedule isn't as difficult as some of these other teams, but you can only play who's on your schedule, and it's not like they're having close calls. They rattled off 47 unanswered against Michigan State on the road last week, the first time they've been down. So I think there's no harm in putting Indiana this high either. I think, if anything, you're setting up a pretty high leverage game against Ohio State in the coming weeks with Indiana's high, whereas like a team like maybe a Penn State or somebody that, yes, they're still ranked in my top 12 where it will be seen in a few minutes, but there's no benefit, in my opinion, for the committee to not put Indiana as high as they deserve, because they either get knocked down in a few weeks when they lose to Ohio State, or they prove their worth that they are this good of a team. So I went Indiana at 7. What'd you do?
We are in lockstep today, Reed, because
I thought I was going to get some difference there on Indiana.
I think when we get to the 8 through 11 range, we might have a little bit of differing. But I mean, I'm all in on with this Indiana team. Like, I will. Even though you beat me, you were 3-3 last week with your picks. I was 2-4. Your upset pick was Michigan State, and it was looking good for the first quarter. And then Indiana
Yeah, just stop
put
them.
on the death train. But no, like you said, like you can only play who's on your schedule, and this team has not shown a real weakness. Like they've won with a backup quarterback by margin. They've won on the road. They've won at home against varying levels of competition, varying levels of teams that they're playing against, and like stylistic differences. And I don't know, man. Like at this point, you're 9 games of the season and you still haven't had a close call. Like that has to be rewarded.
I completely agree. And as Tempe Kids chimes in the chat, unfortunately, a double-digit loss to OSU kicks them out of the playoffs. 2-loss SEC team gets in over them. Well, Tempe Kids, we're starting to run out of 2-loss SEC teams that we're going to get to. So I agree that I don't think Indiana's in with a bullet just yet with a loss to Ohio State. But as the rest of these teams get knocked out, Texas A&M all of a sudden up against it. Ole Miss is a loss away from being knocked out of it. Alabama, LSU, one of those teams will have 3 losses. 3-loss SEC isn't getting in over 1 loss. I think the way this season is breaking down, there will be a year where a 3-loss team gets in. It won't be this year, though, in my opinion.
No, I agree. I think that despite the fact that there is parity, there also is separation, like in like this
Yeah.
12 to 14, or in this top 12 to 14 teams in the country right now.
Yeah. So for number 8, I went Penn State.
Ooh, okay.
Which I
So
think you go.
I went with Tennessee at this spot.
Okay.
And that's not me fully believing in Tennessee. I just think it's where they're going to be. They have the one, like, it's just, they have the win over Alabama in their back pocket. The loss to Arkansas does not look good, but you can kind of write it off as the rigors of the SEC. And I don't know. It's just I feel like the SEC bias is going to come through with Tennessee getting that nod over Penn State, because you start to look at Penn State's resume, they do not have a win that stacks up nearly as well like as the Alabama win for Tennessee.
I think it's more that they lost a really, really hard-fought game against Ohio State that probably could have gone either way. To me, and I mean, Penn State, they still have really kind of blasted every team in their way with relative ease, where
Fair.
Tennessee, I don't think, has the look of a team that has flexed its muscles quite that much all this season. So
That's fair.
I went with Tennessee at 9, and I went Penn State 8. So I respected the Penn State losing a tough one to Ohio State. But again, I went Tennessee at 9, so I'm not like way off on this one. So there's my 9 seed, Tennessee. Where are you at number 9?
Yeah, we just flip-flopped here. I
Okay,
Penn State
that's
at
fine.
9. So yeah,
Okay,
it's we're not very different on that. Like I think we see them in that 8-9 game playing one another. Whatever seed you put them in doesn't really matter at this point.
Okay, so this is where I think I have started to deviate from the norms. Starting here, 10, I went Alabama.
Ooh, okay.
What'd you do?
10, I have Notre Dame.
Okay, so do you want my Notre Dame take now, or do you want it later?
No, hit me with it. Give me the pushback already.
I don't think Notre Dame should be in right now.
Okay.
They have far and away the worst loss of any team in the country. Any team. And you look at who they've beaten. Granted, they've ran it up, but right now, I don't know how you can confidently put Notre Dame in when they lose as a 4-touchdown favorite at home to Northern Illinois, who is 1-3 in MAC play now. To me, the committee's probably going to put Notre Dame in for brand recognition and everything. And maybe they do deserve to be in, but like my bracket, it's on my piece of paper. I'm not putting Notre Dame in. I almost think they should be disqualified from the whole thing with that loss, in my opinion.
I mean, it's completely fair. And much like Tennessee, this isn't me saying I believe in Notre Dame. I certainly don't. I think Notre Dame's going to get waxed whoever they play in this playoff. But like, I do think that Notre Dame, like, yes, they have the worst loss, but they also have a better win than some of these teams in here. Like the win over Texas A&M is still a feather in their cap. And so like, I do think that that's going to be rewarded. I think that legitimately there's a chance Notre Dame is higher than the 10 seed when the committee reveals their rankings. I would not have that, but I think that there's a legitimate chance that is the case.
And also, because I'm going to just poke some holes in Notre Dame, but like that win against Navy, all of a sudden aging pretty poorly. Now
Yeah.
they maybe lost to Rice. And like Alabama, the loss to Vanderbilt on the road. We were just talking about Vanderbilt. All of a sudden is a ranked win. And then they still have the win over Georgia. They lose at Tennessee. Those are 2 playoff teams. They have a win over them already. So again, I also like trying to like actually apply some like logic behind it. Why you put Alabama in or above Notre Dame sets up some more intrigue against LSU this weekend on the road, where it's a playoff team in versus spoiler alert, I don't have LSU in. So like a playoff team in versus a playoff team like right on the bubble. You know, you kind of get some intrigue there because we know that the committee does like to tee up some of these upcoming games that weekend with some like playoff incentive and stuff like that.
Particularly a game that's going to be on the ESPN family of networks.
Yeah, yes. And as Chris chimes in, he said, I don't think Notre Dame should be in either. I think that loss against Northern Illinois is a brutal one. It's a tough one to overlook. So where do you have Alabama in the playoff ranking? Do you have them 11?
I do not. I do not have Alabama in the playoff field.
Okay, so who do you have 11?
So in 11, and this is my hottest take, I have the SMU Mustangs.
That's who I have.
Hell yes. Let's go.
Okay. I thought you were going to have Boise in 11 based on what yours are on. But yeah, I have SMU in as well.
Yeah, I mean, you look at this SMU team. Since the switch to Kevin Jennings, this team has been pouring it on. They just absolutely waxed an undefeated Pitt team last week. Their one loss is 2 points to an undefeated BYU team. And like
with the other quarterback in, which the committee does take into account.
We saw that last year with Jordan Travis. We saw what the committee does take into account personnel. And since the move to Kevin Jennings, this team's been a juggernaut. Like, yes, the Duke game got a little hairy. Let's be clear about that. But that was clearly a look ahead spot to the Pitt game on the road in Durham, North Carolina. Not exactly a short road trip from Dallas, Texas. So SMU has checked every box since the move to Kevin Jennings. You don't have a bad loss on your resume. You now have a quality win on your resume. The Louisville win on the road in Louisville is looking better by the day. Like, SMU deserves to way more consideration than I think nationally they're getting right now.
I agree. And now, just forecasting out a little bit here, Clemson with the loss, all of a sudden SMU in the driver's seat when they come. They're on a bye this week, but when SMU comes back, all of a sudden they're in the driver's seat. I believe it's BC, Virginia, Cal. I think I just did that off the top
I'm looking at their schedule right now. You're right. Yeah. You're absolutely right.
So it's all in front of them now to get in. 2-loss SMU, like if they lose to Miami in the ACC title game, maybe, as Tempe Kids also kind of theorizes in the comments, you think a close loss to an undefeated Miami team would get them in. It probably we'll have to see maybe how BYU shakes out and how the middle of the SEC kind of comes together. Like, we need to see who's really gunning for 11 and 12. I think that would maybe, I'm sure it will work itself out, but I wouldn't say SMU is in if they make the ACC title game.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think in the scenario that Tempe Kids is laying out there, like, I'm not going to say they're completely out, but they would need some help. Like, it kind of takes it out of their own hands. And I'm not talking just about the auto bid, but like, it just like they're left to not their own devices at that point.
Because then all of a sudden it's, well, where's their really impressive win? Because if you could look at where Pitt's probably trending this season, it might not be 11-1. It will probably be closer to like 10-2, 9-3. So I'd lean in, but I'm not super confident, like talking right now, just given we're going to wrap up with like who's kind of on the bubble. But I think we can agree 12 seed Boise State.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I guess this will, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the chaos that could come with the college football playoff. And I'll ask you this about Boise. Like, how realistic do you think Boise State has a chance of being higher than the 12 seed? Because they're not like the G5 champion isn't locked into the 12 seed. It's just the highest ranked group of 5 champion is guaranteed a playoff spot.
Yeah. Boise can work its way up, but you start to look at really the entire Mountain West and like what Boise State really has on their resume. I don't know. Like the Big 12 one, like if we're talking like Boise getting a bye, like I don't see that happening because even a 2-loss Big 12 team, like the losses aren't going to be that crippling. They're going to have more wins than Boise has. Like Boise's going to have like a win over UNLV, And then like what other bowl team do they beat? I'm just there's really not a lot on that schedule. Whereas
Yeah.
at least the Big 12, the losses might not be as impressive as Boise State's loss to Oregon, but the wins are much more impressive than Boise State's. So like, what are you really talking about here? So Boise State can work its way up, but I think they're going to lock themselves into the 12. And I still stand by, keep an eye on Tulane as the dark horse to get that 12 spot. If Boise State were to lose at some point, Tulane is far and away the next best team in the group of 5 ranks.
No, I agree with you on that premise. But I will say, like, the thing that I keep coming back to with Boise is you lost by 1 possession on the road to Oregon, and we're giving Ohio State the benefit of the doubt with that. And granted, Ohio State has a win over Penn State. Ohio State has better wins. I'm not arguing that point.
Yeah.
But I guess with that kind of in their back pocket, if they continue to run the table from this point out, what do you think their ceiling is? Like the 9 seed, the 10 seed?
I would say, just looking at who's around, I would say probably they maybe get the 11 seed. I don't think they go so high.
Okay. I would
like,
probably say the 10 seed.
To me, in my ranking right now, it's I guess maybe if Notre Dame. So okay, I'll say 10 seed also, because like to me right now the 10 seed is Alabama, which it's like probably going to be like close to like the Notre Dame type. So maybe Boise gets the nod over them, but I don't think the brand is strong enough. Like again, like this is still made for TV product, so I don't know how high they're going to end up putting Boise State up there.
And I think that makes sense, and it's something you definitely have to take in consideration. No matter what Boise deserves, their ESPN is going to serve itself.
Yeah, exactly. And then for teams on the bubble, I'm not really going to bring up the Big 12 teams like in detail, but like there's still Iowa State, there's still Kansas State, and there's still Colorado in terms of teams that are in position to win the Big 12 at this very point. We'll see what happens this weekend in the chaotic Big 12. LSU, Ole Miss, opportunities to play themselves into the playoff this very weekend with games that we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. ACC Clemson, I think drawing dead. Unless they get some help getting into the ACC, I do not see them getting an at-large bid. Big Ten, don't see anyone really getting involved here. I think it's these 4 Big Ten teams, and that's going to be it. And then who did I miss? That's kind of it, right? And then I mentioned Tulane as a potential dark horse.
No, 100%.
And Texas A&M, I guess, but they're going to need to beat Texas the last week of the season.
Yeah, and even then, it still might be tricky after the way South Carolina beat them last week. Like
exactly.
That's a tough loss to swallow, definitely. And so let me throw one chaos scenario at you that comes with a question. Let's say Colorado makes the Big 12 championship game. Basically, Iowa State loses Farmageddon to Kansas State in the finale, and Colorado runs the table from here on out, which would put Colorado versus undefeated BYU in the Big 12 championship game. Colorado wins that game. Does BYU get an at-large berth?
And you said BYU is an undefeated team at that point.
Undefeated, but then they lose to Colorado. So 1 loss in the Big 12 championship game.
I have to pull up BYU's schedule to. They play at Utah this weekend, Kansas, at Arizona State, Houston. Dicey. That could be a team that gets screwed. Probably more screwed than Indiana.
Yeah. No, I think Indiana is in a good spot. Like, I don't necessarily agree. Like, I think a 1-loss Indiana team still could get into this playoff, whereas BYU taking a loss, I have a really hard time imagining more than 1 Big 12 team getting into this playoff.
Yeah. And then just before we move on, Chris brings up Wazoo, any pathway. Of course, the Cougars 7-1 in the Pac-2 this season. I don't think so. They are going to have, like a win over like 1, maybe 3 bowl teams in general. And I don't even say have a confidence in terms of Texas Tech at home, at neutral field Washington, and then at Fresno State. I don't see Washington State getting the benefit of the doubt whatsoever. A team that's kind of just been out of sight, out of mind. And that's just kind of unfortunately a credit to the fact that they're not in a conference this season. Well,
100%. And like in terms of their path, like the loss to Boise is going to hurt them. Like the fact that we're talking about Boise like having like a 10 seed ceiling, like that's Washington State's one loss, and they got boat raced by Boise, or Washington State got boat raced by
Yeah,
Boise State. I believe it was like a three-score loss.
Yep.
Yeah. So like that's going to work against them if we're talking about Boise State having a very defined ceiling and you lost to that team. Like that's going to be really hard for you to clear a path to get there.
100%. So great stuff on the playoff bracket. I'm sure we'll be back next week with a bunch of nuanced takes as we move through and get closer to the actual reveal of the 12-team playoff. Cody, before we move on to our pick segment that I am, as you brought up, I didn't even bring it up, that I'm slowly running you down as we both try to get back to 500 in a down year for the both of us. Why don't you tell us about our sponsor today?
100%. You know it's Underdog Fantasy. Underdog is the best place to cash in on all your takes this football season. Which players are going off? Which players are ice cold? Make your entries in just a few taps and turn your sports opinions into real money. Join over 5 million fans who are already playing on Underdog Fantasy. With their champs game, you could win money by making entries with your favorite players. Underdog is the best place to play champions, so sign up and deposit now using the promo code Stacking the Box, the name of this program, all one word, to get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. Me personally, I love Underdog. It's a great way to take your handicapping and get super specific with the players that you think have a good matchup, and you can go higher on their on their stats, or players that you think have a bad matchup, you can go lower on there. This week, I like Shador Sanders higher than 2.5 passing touchdowns against Texas Tech. But if you want to go higher or lower on Shador or any player stats this week, download the app today and use code Stacking the Box, all one word, to get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. Higher or lower, you make the call on Underdog. Must be 18 and over, 19 and over in Alabama and Nebraska, 19 and over in Colorado for some games, 21 and over in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in the state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. That's 1-800-639-8783 or text NEXT STEP to 53342. In New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. Underdog Fantasy, man. It's the good stuff.
That and a great ad read by the Cody Williams. Okay, so I squeaked out a win last week, 23 and 28 on the year, so I got some work to do still, but I am running you down 24 and 28, Cody. So things are heating up as they tend to do here. We have met as we hit into the home stretch of the season. We got a few big games we're going to get to. We also have a ton of weeknight action. It is the return of Maction this week. And that's where we're going to start before we get to our marquee matchup. So weeknight games. We got 2 tonight on Tuesday. We got 2 on Wednesday, 2 more on Thursday, and then 4 on Friday. Cody, where are you taking us on the weeknight card for your first pick?
No disrespect to Maction. I will be tuning in. I will be enjoying it. But I'm going to Friday night, and I'm going to a power conference game. I'm taking the over 44.5 in Iowa UCLA. That might sound ugly, but the simplest handicap I can give of this, Iowa's offense doesn't suck anymore, man. Like, Iowa's offense is functional. It is actually pretty decent since they made the move to Sullivan at quarterback. They put up 32 plus points in each of their last 4 games and 40 or more in 3 of those games. The move to Sullivan has opened up not just like a little bit of the passing offense. There's at least a threat because Cade McNamara is terrible and Brendan Sullivan is not. But it's also opened up the run game even more so for Caleb Johnson, who is a stud. And you look at this UCLA defense, it's not what it was last year. They're 111th in defensive success rate against the run this year. I think Iowa's going to be able to pretty much control the ball and run at will, reel off some explosive plays in the run, which they've been doing a really good job of late as well. Meanwhile, UCLA was a team I was very eager to fade early in the season. They've started to find a little bit. Now, granted, it was against Rutgers and I'm totally blanking on Nebraska. Yeah, so 2 teams that are a little on the downturn right now. But Ethan Garbers is playing well. I don't need UCLA to do a ton offensively. I need them to just get me a little bit. You get me 28-17 Iowa victory in this game, we're cashing the over 44.5. And I think that's a very realistic total for what we're looking at in this matchup.
Key number 45 on total. So getting below that for an over doesn't hurt the cause either. I do wonder if UCLA actually turned a corner. or they played like really banged up Rutgers in Nebraska. That kind of
Yeah.
helped get the offense to look a little bit nicer. Iowa, pretty big favorite here, 5.5-point favorite on the road on Friday night. Tricky travel, I guess, traveling across the country for a Friday night kick. That's 6 o'clock local, 9 o'clock Eastern. We'll see, but can't hate the look there with Iowa going to Brendan Sullivan. For me, I'm also on the Friday night card. Give me the over 67.5 between New Mexico and San Diego State. You want to talk about points bonanza. This is the highest total on the board this weekend. I like it. You look at these New Mexico games. In 4 of the last 5 games, they've scored 50 or more points.
Yeah.
San Diego State plays that top 20 tempo in terms of seconds per play. I honestly like what the San Diego State offense has done of late with Danny O'Neal really coming to his own in Sean Lewis's offense. I know they got blown out by Boise State. New Mexico hasn't been able to stop a prayer all season long. You look at some of these scores. I mean, Air Force's offense put up 45 against them. New Mexico State put up 40. So I think an offense that I think is actually trending up can also get into the high 30s or 40s here. I think it's going to be back and forth, last team ball, but I need 5 touchdowns from each with a fast tempo. Sure, I'll take the over.
I'm going to agree with 10P Kids, garbage teams, a ton of points. But no, this is a great look. I mean, New Mexico gave up a ton of points to Wyoming last week. That tells you everything you need to know about that defense. Sean Lewis is going to have a field day scheming against this defense.
Well, hold on here. Let me get you the first half score of that New Mexico game last week. At halftime, Wyoming and New Mexico it was 35-35 at half.
Cash the over.
Yeah. So over. Yeah. So I just think, especially with the pace, you could definitely see plenty of points here. So 67.5 for me. Now let's move on to Saturday. Some of the bigger games on the slate, bigger games of the season. Cody, we got Georgia traveling to the Grove to take on Ole Miss. Georgia, they beat Florida in the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. It was far from impressive, in my opinion. Carson Beck continues to struggle mightily this season. 3 interception day for him against Florida, but Florida couldn't really pounce on it. They lose their backup quarterback, DJ Lagaway, who freshman quarterback is a better way of probably phrasing it.
Yes.
They are now, though, on to their third string quarterback, and that's AJ Warner. Florida, they couldn't do anything in that game. Georgia now facing an Ole Miss team that some may believe are onto something after the 63-point outburst in Fayetteville last weekend against Arkansas. Are you a buyer or seller of Ole Miss, and how do you view this marquee matchup, win or go home scenario for Ole Miss in terms of making the playoff?
Can I buy and sell? Like, a little bit of this, a little bit of that? Because that's
you
kind
can
of
buy some things and sell some others. Start with the buy. Let's start positive.
I think this Ole Miss team is better than it gets credit for, like, quite frankly, and that's what I'm buying. Like, I think they have the goods to get a game out of Georgia. This defense is playing at an extremely high level. We've seen Georgia's interior offensive line struggle a little bit as of late. With the way Walter Nolan's been coming on, that's not exactly the matchup that Georgia and Carson Beck want to see. He struggled with that interior pressure, and we've seen him we've seen defenses create turnovers off of that. So, like, I'm buying Ole Miss being able to give Georgia a game in this one. I'm selling Ole Miss being able to score 60 plus or a big number in this game, because I'm going Ole Miss team total under 26.5. That's my play for this game. To be clear, coming off a week where Ole Miss did score 60 points, where Jackson Dart threw for over 500 yards and 6 touchdowns, that doesn't make me feel great about this play. Having said that, Ole Miss is still dealing with offensive line issues. This offensive line has been posting poor grades and pass blocking pretty routinely. Georgia, although inconsistent, has the dudes up front to be able to exploit that in a very big way and really throw this Ole Miss offense kind of on its head. Ole Miss still can't run the ball. They haven't been able to run the ball effectively all season. So Georgia and Glenn Schumann being able to look for the pass and ways to dial up pressure, I think they're able to do that and really slow this Ole Miss offense down, even when it's scripted early in the game. The one thing that worries me about that is field position. You look at Ole Miss and SEC play. Outside of the Arkansas game, there's only one other game where they've hit over this team total, and that was against South Carolina when their first score was on an extremely short field because Shane Beamer went for it on 4th down. They scored a touchdown on a 39-yard drive in that game and still only got to 27 against a defense that in South Carolina, who we've seen pretty comparable to what Georgia is capable of at Georgia's ceiling. I just think that this is going to be a lower scoring game no matter which way it goes. But asking Ole Miss to basically score 4 touchdowns, I just don't see that happening in this game.
Yeah, lot of agreement there from me. Ole Miss injury concerns still loom, not just on the offensive line. Henry Parrish Jr. now out for this game. He's not even on the depth chart. Trey Harris, lingering concerns about his lower body injury. He was in a jersey. It was kind of like a ploy. He wasn't really going to play. So we'll see if he can suit up this week. I agree with you, though. I think this Ole Miss team, I know the Lane Kiffin shine makes you think, and even Jackson Dart, he's putting up numbers and stuff. He leads the nation passing, but it's not leading to points.
Yeah.
And you're going to face a Georgia defensive line that we know can ratchet it up against pretty much anyone. And, Dart is pretty mobile, but he's not Jalen Milroe, who was really the only offense that has, and I guess Michael Van Buren for Mississippi State, another dual threat quarterback. But we have not seen the more traditional pocket passers do much against this Georgia defense this season. So I took the full game under 55.
Okay.
I also wonder, with Carson Beck's turnover issues here, are they going to open this up against a really good Ole Miss defense, an Ole Miss defense that checks in 24th in EPA per pass, a lead against the run? Is Carson Beck, do we give him the benefit of the doubt still going on the road?
I don't at this point. And to be clear, I'm still a bet believer in the talent. I legitimately think this is something mental that's going on with him, because you look at the way Kirby Smart is reacting to him on the sidelines. It is not producer Joanne chiming in, the Cavender twins ruining Carson Beck. Can't argue with that, frankly. But I do think that you look at the way Kirby Smart is handling him on the sideline. When Stetson Bennett would throw a pick in this Georgia offense, Kirby Smart would tear into him on the sidelines. He wasn't coddling him. He wasn't, we know Kirby has the ability to get animated. When Carson Beck is throwing these picks, it's very clear that he's trying very hard not to get animated. He's trying very hard to talk to him and very much coach him out of some mental block that he is currently in.
Yeah, I wonder if that's going to change the game script in this one, where you see a more conservative approach where you try to, all right, let's keep it underneath. Let's not open up the, because if you remember when we were talking Alabama, Georgia, I was like, I think Georgia needs to test this Alabama secondary. We now have several instances where Carson Beck is struggling to push it down the field reliably. So I wonder if this game is played more in a phone booth and we see this game dictated in the low 20s. And this is more of a rock fight. Again, I mentioned the Ole Miss offense struggling. You brought up some great points about them failing to really surpass 26.5. They did it once against South Carolina. What about last year against Georgia? Again, different Georgia team. I know it was on the road. It's not necessarily apples to oranges, but 17 points for Lane against Kirby. So is he going to be able to scheme this up? Because I still think this Georgia defense is really good. And I'm just not going to buy into Ole Miss's offense being fixed because they got it ahead and basically front ran against Arkansas. So I went for the under in this one.
No, 100%. And let's not forget, Taylon Green got injured last week. Still played, but was clearly not the same player. Has been banged up for the past few weeks on top of that. So it was very easy to front run in that game. And even if Carson Beck does throw his pick problems don't end here, that you're still not going to be able to front run against Georgia. Alabama learned you can't front run against Georgia or you will get caught. They almost lost that game because they tried to front run after building a big lead. And on top of that, what you mentioned about the game script for Georgia, you look at what they did in the second half against Florida when that game was hairier than I'm sure Kirby or anyone in Athens wanted it to be. They put Nate Frazier into a big role into that game out of the backfield and kind of put Trevor Etienne to the side a little bit. And I think
banged up.
Yeah, I mean, still, I think honestly, the offense has looked better with Frazier running the football, in my opinion, this season. And knowing Mike Bobo, knowing what we know about Mike Bobo, I don't think we deviate from that plan. I think Frazier plays a really big role in this game.
Yeah. Who do you think wins?
I'm going to go with Georgia.
I agree.
I do think it's close, though. I think the 2.5 line is pretty indicative of how close this game is going to be played.
Yeah, I side with Georgia, though, in this one. But I like the under a little bit more. Let's move on to the other big game we were talking about during our mock bracket. Alabama LSU. This is actually a loser leaves town. This is it.
Yeah.
This is it. This is a playoff game in November.
We love it.
This is what people who wanted expansion were clamoring for, and you're getting it. Alabama travels to Death Valley. Both teams off a bye. LSU looked like they were onto something 2 weeks ago against Texas A&M. They fall on their face in the second half. Alabama, shaky for about a month since they beat Georgia, in my opinion. So where do you stand, Cody, with Alabama traveling to LSU? Bama laying a field goal, night game, Death Valley, total 58.5.
Yeah, so I really wanted to go LSU full game here. LSU can't finish games, and that really worries me. So I'm going to play that a little differently and go LSU plus 1.5 in the first half. What I worry about with this LSU team that I think they have struggled with in most of their games this season is second half adjustments. When the opposing coaching staff, which I do trust Kalen DeBoer and his staff to be able to do, when they adjust, LSU hasn't made the same adjustments, and we saw that against Texas A&M. Texas A&M made the switch to Marcel Reed, and they look like they'd never seen an RPO in their entire life. Now, I do think that Blake Baker is going to have knowing what Jalen Milroe in this office is, knowing that there's not going to be a dramatic scheme shift from what Alabama's been running. I do think the LSU defense looks more like it did in the first half against Texas A&M than it did in the second half. And as they come out, you already mentioned it. Alabama's secondary is still something I'm worried about. You look at their two big SEC road losses to Vanderbilt and Tennessee. They posted coverage grades in those two games below 51, according to PFF. This secondary can be had, and you look at Tennessee and Vanderbilt, give me LSU's wide receiver core over both of those teams for sure. I think LSU is going to be able to exploit the Alabama secondary in the first half, particularly in the game script. And so, I think LSU goes into halftime probably not just tied, but probably with a lead. Whether or not that holds for the full game, we shall see. But I do think LSU gets off to a good start in this one.
Yeah, I don't hate that look at all. I went with the over 58 and a half. So let's start with the Alabama side first. We know Kalen DeBoer can script it up with the best of them. We know that he has proven he has an ability to work with Jalen Milroe. I know it's been a little up and down of late, especially, but we know that it's in there in the Georgia script where Jalen Milroe ran for 100 yards in the first half. Yeah. I know it's a different defensive coordinator and everything, and LSU was banged up in last year's game, but I can't look past the fact that Alabama hung 40 plus on LSU last year, and Milroe looked almost his best. So that sticks in my mind. I was never a believer in LSU's defense taking some serious midseason stride. I think they got kind of had a fortuitous run of some good scheduling. Where they got Ole Miss at the end of a 7-game stretch. They got Arkansas banged up and kind of sat on the ball. For this one, I think Alabama knows, and it's their preference. When they need to, they will score. I don't think that they're going to hold back anything. I think this is when Kalen DeBoer knows he needs a game, he kind of goes out there and he tries to take it and set the pace. I do think you mentioned a lot about Alabama's defense. How about 115th in explosive pass defense?
Yeah.
I think Nussmeier could really cook this secondary. So I think both teams can score. I honestly think this game is going to be an instant classic. I think we're getting back and forth in a lot of big plays from both teams. And I just think we're going to see hyper aggressive vertical plays from both quarterbacks. I just think over. I don't really have a strong opinion on who's going to win this game. I don't know. There's a case to be made for both teams. I do think the Dellinger injury for LSU on the offensive line is pretty important. But I just think that both teams are going to need to look to score instead of a grinding pace. So I actually like the over here because I don't really trust either team's secondary from stopping big plays.
And I think that's completely fine. I think that's why I lean the LSU side full game. Again, I don't trust them enough to make that my best bet for this game, but and first half, because you're at home in Death Valley, which is an advantage. Let's be very clear about that. Death Valley is still a tough place to play. Never forget about it. And I think it's going to be a shootout, quite frankly. I think it's going to be a game where the margin never gets too out of hand because I think both of these teams score quite a bit.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is going to be a fascinating game to watch. I'm sure it's going to be a thriller, in my opinion.
Oh,
yeah. Let's move on to what is a surprisingly big game. Was not on the bingo card for the start of the season. Colorado travels to Lubbock to take on Texas Tech, who's off the stunning upset of Iowa State. Colorado off the bye, off the Travis Hunter media tour to College Game Day and Big Noon kickoff. Colorado laying 3.5, total of 62.5. Cody, what's your look in this one?
I'm going Colorado as the road favorite at 3.5. I'm taking the 3.5 and just kind of running with it. I think Texas Tech is pretty much indicative of what the Big 12 in the middle is. They can beat most anyone in any given week, and they can also lose to almost anyone in this conference in any given week. Whereas Colorado, from what I've seen from the Buffs in recent weeks, I think this team is like not just, oh, let's talk about Coach Prime, let's talk about Travis Hunter, let's talk about Shador. I think they're just good, man. Like, I think this is a good Colorado team. We've seen this defense improve. They've been putting up some like their best defensive grades over the past 5 weeks in Big 12 play. And then the offense, Shador has been playing phenomenally this season. Like, I Cam Ward aside, Shador looks like one of the surest NFL draft picks that we're talking about in this draft class, which I wasn't wholly convinced of coming into the season. You look at Texas Tech and their defense, 126th in coverage grade according to PFF, 125th in tackling grade. This against this Colorado group of wide receivers, Jimmy Horn Jr., Shepard, Travis Hunter. I think that explosive plays are going to be coming in droves for this Colorado offense. And while I think Texas Tech will get their share, I don't think it's going to be as consistent. I think Colorado scores at will in this one and is able, with, frankly, college football playoff livelihood on the line, they need to go out and get this win, and I think they do it handily.
Yeah, it's like you saw my notes. I had a bunch of those PFF grades queued up for Texas Tech defense. I went with the over, though.
Okay.
Because I do think Texas Tech, while I don't trust their defense a lick, the offense has proven to be, and again, that's with Brennan Morton or their backup in. I mean, Morton, I know it was a low scoring game against Ohio State, but Brennan Morton made some like some serious, like gutsy plays throughout that game. So I think Morton, I've always liked him. It's been up and down. He can't stay healthy. But while I think Colorado's defense good, it's not fully locked down. They still give up points. It's not like they suffocate the opposition. So I do think Texas Tech could get theirs. And this offense for Texas Tech, 35th in EPA per play. They're averaging 36 a game. So I think they're going to be in catch-up mode. And also, Joey McGuire is one of the most aggressive coaches in college football in terms of going for it on fourth down and stuff like that. So maybe if they start falling behind, they give Colorado a short field or something like that. You know what I mean? Like I could see a few really chaotic plays. And again, that could work both ways. They can maybe go for it as opposed to kicking a field goal, and that kind of screws the over. But I'm going to side with points in this one. I think Colorado could definitely get 5 touchdowns. I think Texas Tech could keep up in this one. An upset wouldn't surprise it because I think it's like you were saying, I think Texas Tech is like super volatile. You don't really know which one you're going to get. It's more like I think Colorado has the ceiling to smash them. But it is a tough place to play on the road against, on the road, especially in Lubbock, always tricky. But I lean Colorado, but I feel confident that both teams are cooking on offense. So I went for the over, but I don't hate your play on Colorado laying the points either.
No, I like both of our plays. Like I mentioned, I don't expect this Colorado defense to shut down Texas Tech. This is not a shutdown defense. This is a defense that doesn't hamstring Colorado like what we saw last year.
Exactly, 100%. And Colorado's defense has taken some serious strides, but this is still like a really good Texas Tech offense. So, honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if it's like last team with the ball wins the game. Like like a tie game or like a 3-point game or something like that, and they need it. The team with the ball needs to just go the length of the field to win.
100%. Yeah, and like your point about Joe McGuire's aggressiveness is well taken on my end because that's definitely like you see in a lot of those go for it situations. I think in college football more so than the NFL, you see explosive plays out of that all the time. So like you're either looking at short field or explosive play. Either way, great for the over.
Yeah, exactly. Let's move to our upset picks for this week. Last week, you got yours home, Cody. You took Vanderbilt. You said screw the points. We're just taking them against Auburn. I had a good start against Indiana with Michigan State. It did not go my way, obviously. So we move to this week's slate. Where are you looking for your upset pick?
I'm going to Blacksburg, where the Clemson Tigers, reeling off their loss to Louisville, are going to lose again to the Virginia Tech Hokies. Look, I'm worried about the Kyron Jones' health. Like, that would probably make me feel a lot better about this game for Virginia Tech. At the same time, Clemson might have fooled us a little bit with what they did post-Georgia game. look back at their schedule, Reed. What's Clemson's best win this season?
Couldn't tell you.
NC State,
I was
probably.
gonna say it's probably NC State.
Which that's not what you're writing home about. I can tell you that
No.
right now. And then you go and you play a Louisville team in Death Valley and get smoked. And now, granted, I think that Jeff Brom versus the Clemson coaching staff is a coaching advantage for Louisville that Virginia Tech does not necessarily have. But Blacksburg, never an easy place to play. They smell, and when this team smells blood in the water, we've seen them be able to kind of get into that mix. We saw what they did against Miami in Miami. Like, this Virginia Tech team has shown a ceiling that they can compete with the top of the ACC. And I'm not so sure that Clemson is as close to Miami as we thought, as close to SMU as we thought. So when you're looking at all this, Clemson going on the road, Clemson showing a little bit of its warts, its defense definitely not being up to snuff of what we think of when we think of Clemson. I think Virginia Tech is very live to get this one.
Yeah, I could see it. I also don't think the Kyron Jerone's injury, we'll see. The Colin Schlee, the Kent State UCLA transfer, I don't think it was really a downgrade. They nearly beat Syracuse. They kind of melted down again. So I don't think like there's like a severe downgrade there. Obviously, Jerone's in gives them some more upside, but Schlee had that offense moving just fine. They scored, I think it was like 31. It went to overtime, but I don't think they scored in overtime. So 31 in regulation on the road. I think it's like not that big of a downgrade. For me, so disclaimer, if Haynes King was healthy, my pick would have been Georgia Tech, but I'm not 100% sure he's going to play. So I'm not going to fire that bullet.
I looked there as well.
I'm not going to fire that bullet, but we could laugh about that when Georgia Tech wins this weekend against Miami. But so my pick, I'm going to go for North Texas plus 172 against Army. I saw Tempe Kids also shout that out. I ignored the comment because I knew I was going to talk about it here.
Yeah.
So let's start with the possibility that Bryson Daly might not play. Surprise scratch against Air Force last week. I don't think it's an injury. I think it's like a sickness, infection type idea. So who knows if he's good to play for this one. Jeff Monken gave a weird quote about how we're expecting him back this season. We're hopeful he could be back next week against North Texas. That doesn't sound like he's like definitely in on this game.
Nah.
This number is like a halfway number, in my opinion, but plus 172 on the money line. North Texas, they cannot defend a lick. If Daly's out, they're obviously super live because I think there's a serious drop-off from Daly to the backup. But even so, North Texas offense will be far and away the best offense Army has faced this entire season. This North Texas offense has proven it could score on anybody. High variance game. It might just take a few stops to get there. If Daly's out, for sure. If he's in, obviously I like it less. It's a good starting quarterback, but I think there's enough variance here on the road. Maybe the quarterback's unhealthy. Army, I know like they have put up a ton of points, but like I'm not sure they like want to get into a shootout. Just given that offense, it takes like one stalled drive to really throw this out of whack. So I went for North Texas on the money line. Shout out Tempe Kids for being on that as well.
No, 100%. With the uncertainty of Daly, like, I mean, that burned me last week. We had no idea that Bryson Daly wasn't going to play. I had Army covering against Air Force. Didn't get there because this offense.
Honestly, it nearly did. There were some plays there at the end that could have thrown like a pick six or something. Air Force is terrible.
Air Force is really bad, but the Army side of that, the offense was nothing like what it has been with Bryson Daly. So it is a completely different team. And so, like, given that uncertainty that we have at this point in the week, which I'm leaning towards Daly not playing. Like, I don't know if you saw the Army backup. There was a clip that went a little viral after the game of him like going up to Bryson Daly and basically saying, "Hey, we're going to win this one for you." That doesn't sound like you're talking to a teammate who's coming back the next week. Like, that's not something you say to them in that case. And you combine that with the Monken quote, like, it definitely feels like something's going on here that Bryson Daly might not play. And if that's the case, North Texas is very live. Like, we talk about Texas Tech being high variance. North Texas is high variance as it comes.
Yeah. I mean, some of their score lines are just absolutely ridiculous. And their defense is terrible. So,
truly horrendous.
It's definitely, you just got to hope that they're there at the end and that Chandler Morris has the ball last. What about Sickos pick? Where are you going?
Sickos pick, I'm going Washington State, who we already talked about on the show, covering minus 20.5 against Utah State in Pullman. In Pullman this season, the Cougars have put up 70 points, 37 points, 54 points, and 42 points. Now they get to go up against the Utah State defense that I want to pick on at any chance and opportunity that I can, because they are outside of the top 125 in success rate against both the run and on dropbacks. Utah State can't defend anyone. Their offense is actually taking a step back. We saw a couple weeks ago they only put up 27 against Wyoming, a team that is more than willing to give their opponents a big number on the scoreboard. I think this Utah State team is dead in the water. You're going to Pullman, a tough place to play, and a Washington State offense that can absolutely pour it on, particularly at home. So winning by 3 scores, I think it happens.
So I went a similar route, big favorite. I'm laying it with Tulane, minus 26.5 against Temple.
There we go.
This Tulane team is a buzzsaw. They are absolutely running over teams. They steamrolled Charlotte last week. I mean, some of these scores are ridiculous. You just go through, like, their ceiling to destroy a team is quite high and quite likely. Tulane just round off some games. They beat Charlotte last week on the road 34-3 on a short week. They beat UAB earlier this season 71-10. They beat South Florida 45-10. And this team has absolutely destroyed opponents. And Temple is not a team that I necessarily trust to keep up with teams that have significantly more talent than them. We saw East Carolina, who I think has a fairly high ceiling. They hung 50 plus on Temple after firing their coach. I think we could see something similar here. And again, I keep mentioning it, like Tulane playoff possibility, style points are big, and I think they could want to run this up. So 4 touchdowns. Yeah, I think Tulane could get this.
First off, I'll give you kudos. I do like the pick. I will say, does your last 2 picks do seem like you're wish casting your Tulane into the playoff with Army going down in the AAC and then Tulane with a heavy victory?
I think I need Army at its best to help Tulane like prop up their standing. So we'll see. I know Tulane needs a lot of help, but if I could get there.
And no, I like the pick. Temple's terrible, dude. Like Temple's just a bad team.
Yeah. So great picks, Cody. Let's recap the show. We'll get out of here and we'll start simulating the rest of the season so we can get the next slate of brackets out. So what are your picks for this week?
So I've got Iowa UCLA over 44.5. I've got the Ole Miss team total under 26.5 against Georgia. In Alabama LSU, give me LSU plus 1.5 in the first half. Colorado at Texas Tech. I like Colorado covering as a road favorite, minus 3.5. Upset picks, give me Virginia Tech plus 190 over Clemson in Blacksburg. And then Sickos pick, it's Wazoo minus 20.5 at home against Utah State.
Great stuff. And for me, I got my week started with an over 67.5 in New Mexico, San Diego State, the under 55 in Georgia, Ole Miss, the over 58.5 in Alabama, LSU, the over 62.5 in Colorado, Texas Tech. I'm counting some points this week. North Texas plus 172 against Army. And then my Sickos pick is Tulane minus 26.5 against Temple. Cody, great show. Great talk about the playoffs. We'll be back same time next Tuesday talking about the updated playoff bracket. We will, every Tuesday they're going to be releasing this now. So we'll be like almost like the pregame show. But we will be back same time next Tuesday to break down everything in college football, get you ready for the updated playoff bracket reveal and week 12. Enjoy the games this weekend.
Enjoy them.